We shouldn't do it at the federal level,
No,
but, you know,
right.
or maybe a 14-year-old.
Just a moment left in this program. You can
They're
see
good
it
for
in its
something.
entirety.
That's
Go to
a
our
lot.
website, cspan.org.
That's a great point.
The U.S.
actually,
Senate
in
is
many
about to
cases,
start their day. Senators will continue working on a bill that would prevent the student loan interest rates from doubling on July 1st, going from 3.4% to 6.8%. And now live Senate coverage here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. O God, our refuge, help us to never doubt your generous love. You gave us heaven's best gift and desire to freely give us more than we can ask or imagine. Even when we sin, you still love us. Great is your faithfulness. Give to our lawmakers gifts that only you possess. Give them this day the gifts of courage to admit mistakes, grace to rise when they fall, and peace that the world can't give. Give them this day the gifts of forgiveness for the past, courage for the present, and hope for the future. Keep them calm in the quiet center of their lives so that they may be serene in the swirling stresses of life. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., May 9, 2012. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Kirsten E. Gillibrand, a senator from the state of New York, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Madam President.
Majority Leader.
I move to proceed to S. 2343. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent. The time until 2 p.m. be equally divided and controlled between two leaders or the designees, with the Republicans controlling the first 30 minutes, majority controlling the second 30 minutes.
Without objection. Clerk will report the motion.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 365 as 2343, a bill to amend the Higher Education Act of 1965 to extend the reduced interest rate for federal direct Stafford loans and for other purposes.
Mr. President, Madam President,
Majority Leader.
the clerk just read the matter before the Senate. It's to prevent the loans that students get to be able to go to school, money they borrow, to prevent the interest rate by doubling from 3.4% to 6.8%. That's the bill that's before this Senate. Yesterday, the Republicans continued to filibuster our plan to make that not happen. We do not want the rates to double. We don't want them to go up at all. There's 30,000 people in Nevada that are depending on our doing something to reduce those rates. But what's worse, in my estimation, I think the American people, is the Republicans seem proud of blocking this legislation. Not a single Republican voted to allow the debate to go forward. Madam President, this isn't an issue of saying, okay, if I vote for this, this will be the legislation. They wouldn't even let us go forward on it to debate it. I've said that if they don't like, they've said that they like the bill except they don't like the way it's paid for. Fine. Let us get on the bill and offer amendments to pay for it. But no, every single Republican voted no. Every single Republican said, we're not going to allow a debate on this. But the American people certainly shouldn't be surprised, because this has been going on for 3 years, almost 4 years. Everything is a fight. They're blocking legislation that would allow us to stop the increase of student loan interest. It's wrong. Now, the person that signed this legislation to make this interest rate such as it is was President Bush. So I hope Republicans will come to their senses and work with us toward a compromise. But I'm not holding my breath, because as I indicated, they seem proud that they've stopped another piece of legislation. They're all together. Now, what does this mean? They're hanging together to stop legislation, to stop progress. Madam President, as we work to create jobs and make college affordable, our colleagues, my Republican friends, on the other side of the aisle are operating under a different set of priorities. In the House, for example, there are efforts now underway to undo a hard-fought August agreement to cut more than $2 trillion from the deficit over the next decade. That agreement came, Madam President, after threats by the Tea Party-driven House, and now 40% of the people over here are Tea Party advocates, to shut down the government. They want to do that in a couple different ways. Not allow us to continue funding for government programs. And then they had a big thing here for the first time ever to have a knockdown, drag-out fight over weeks and weeks over whether we should increase the debt ceiling in this country. During President Reagan's time as running the country, it was done dozens of times. But no, nothing these folks will do without a big fight. So as a result of that, we came to an agreement. It was bipartisan. Some say it was forced upon the Republicans, but they voted for it, to reduce the deficit. And the deficit that we couldn't reduce this before August of last year, we said, okay, fine. If we don't do something about it this year, then there will be automatic cuts called sequestration. Now, Madam President, the House is doing everything they can to walk away from the agreement that we made, the bipartisan vote that we took. They're doing everything that they can. They have a Republican budget, the so-called Ryan budget. And now they have something, I also say so-called, because they're trying to make it a reconciliation bill, but they can't do it because they're not following the law to do that. So they not only renege on this bipartisan bicameral agreement to reduce spending, but they reflect fundamentally skewed priorities. They hand out even more tax breaks to multimillionaires and shield corporate defense contractors, all at the expense of hardworking middle-class families, the elderly, and those that can least afford it. That's what they're doing in the House. They're going to have the so-called rule today and vote on it shortly thereafter. They would slash investments that strengthen our economy and just shreds the safety social net. President Dwight Eisenhower, now, Madam President, let's remind everybody he was a Republican, a tremendous president. Each day that goes by, people are looking at him more favorably. Here's what he said, quote, "Every gun that is made every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and not clothed. Close quote. This isn't some left-wing, socialistic-leaning liberal. It's Dwight Eisenhower, five-star general, led the invasion of Normandy and did many other great things, started the national highway system. Here's what he said: every gun that's made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and not clothed. I didn't make that up. That's what he said. In a balanced world, one where a strong national defense and a strong social safety net are both valuable pillars of a successful society, that need not be necessarily true, what President Eisenhower said. But the Republican plan would enshrine into law a set of unbalanced priorities and ensure the kind of terrible math General Eisenhower envisioned. Unlike defense contractors and billionaires, ordinary Americans don't have high-priced lobbyists to protect them. That's our job. That's our job. There is not a person on this side of the aisle that doesn't believe that it's good that we have wealthy people in America. We have United States senators here who are Democrats that are wealthy. Certainly not all Democrats, but there are some. We don't look down at people who are rich, but we do have to look out for people who are in need of our help. Most of these rich people have all kinds of lobbyists and people here to help them. But the people in Henderson, Nevada, and Ely, Nevada, Winnemucca, Nevada, they don't have people back here helping them. They have us. So Republicans are going after those who can't fight back, hardworking Americans and struggling families. Let's review just a little bit of history again. The sequester isn't the first bipartisan agreement to reduce the deficit. Madam President, when I became the Democratic leader, I thought, having had served on the Foreign Affairs Committee and the House of Representatives and been very interested in America's involvement in foreign affairs, I took a trip to Central and South America. I thought it was so necessary. I took Democratic and Republican senators with me. But I was very careful in picking two senators I wanted to go on that trip. Judd Gregg. Judd Harmon was a professor of mine at college. Judd Gregg, a very fine senator from New Hampshire who's retired, I'm sorry to say. A person that I recommended be part of President Obama's initial cabinet. He agreed to take that job. Some things came up that he didn't do it. But a wonderful man. And no one other than perhaps Kent Conrad, who I also wanted to go on that trip. I don't know which one knows more about the inner workings of the finance of this country, Gregg or Conrad, but they're both good, and I want them to go together. And they did. They spent hours and hours seated in that airplane, working out something to do something about the deficit. They both believed it needed some really difficult, hard work. And they decided to do what the Base Closing Commission did. That is, prepare legislation, give it to a commission, bring it back to us. There would be no amendments, no filibuster, up or down vote. And that was their legislation. They wrote that and brought it to the floor. So I, as the leader, decided I would move to proceed to it. And I moved to proceed to it. Should be a slam dunk. 7 Republicans who co-sponsored the legislation voted against it. I couldn't bring it to the floor. So that was where the Bowles-Simpson Commission came from, as a result of the Republicans walking away from their own efforts to reduce the deficit. The Bowles-Simpson was very difficult. They had to have 14 out of 18 do it, and you had 18 people had to get 14 of the 18 to approve it, I repeat. So Didn't work. Couldn't get that many people to vote for it. In the meantime, the president is working, President Obama is working as hard as he could with the lead spokesperson for the Republicans was the Speaker of the House, John Boehner. John Boehner said, I didn't get elected to do small things, I want to do big things. And President Obama, to his detriment with his base, said, I'll do something to change Social Security, I'll do Medicare, did all these things. He agreed to do them publicly. But the Republicans could never, John Boehner could never go against Grover. Grover Norquist, who has so much, this is the Grover Norquist Congress, because the Republicans shake in their boots. They will not do anything, even though the American people by a more than 70% majority say people making more than $1 million a year should contribute to what the problems are in this country. So that fell apart. A group of 6 senators, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, they'd been on the Bowles-Simpson Commission. They said, well, we should do something about it. They were in the press. They had press conferences. Oh, this is going down the road, doing all kinds of great things. While that was going on, there was a decision made, and it was a law passed to create a super committee I appointed Senator Patty Murray of Washington to run this. No one in the Senate, Democrat or Republican, has more respect than Patty Murray. So she worked so hard with the other 11 members of Congress to come up with something. A few days before they were to arrive at a decision, and the Gang of 6 members out here are doing all this stuff all the time, I get a letter signed by virtually every Republican senator saying, we're not going to raise revenue for anything. Super committee didn't work there. Gang of 6 is gone. So we passed this thing last August to fund government for 2 years and to say if we don't arrive at another $1.2 trillion in deficit reduction during this year, it automatically kicks in at the end of this year, at the beginning of next year. So that's where we are. And the Republicans in the House are trying to change that. So that's what this little history lesson's been all about. Now, Madam President, I don't like sequester. I wish we hadn't. It was a hard pill to swallow, but it was the right thing to do. If we're going to ever reduce the staggering deficits, we're going to have to make some hard decisions. So that's what this is all about. But that was the point. It's hard to do, therefore we have to do it. The sequester, which in effect would take $600 billion from domestic programs and $600 billion from defense programs. They were designed to be tough enough to force the 2 sides to reach a balanced deal. Hasn't happened yet. Now, Madam President, as I said earlier, as I said with General Eisenhower's statement, I didn't make that up. That's what he said. My complaining about the Republicans here being so unreasonable about everything is something that I'm not somebody, a lone wolf crying in the wilderness. We have 2 long-time, nonpartisan watchers of Congress. One from the American Enterprise Institute, which is a conservative think tank, another from Brookings Institute, that wrote an article saying, it's the Republicans, everybody. Can't you see what they are doing? Here's one thing they said. We have been studying Washington politics in Congress for more than 40 years, and never have we seen them this dysfunctional. In our past writings, we've criticized both parties when we believed it was warranted. Today, however, we have no choice but to acknowledge that the core of the problem lies with the Republican Party. They further said the GOP has become an insurgent outlier in American politics. It is ideologically extreme, scornful of compromise, unmoved by conventional understanding of facts, evidence, and science, and dismissive of the legitimacy of its political opposition. What brave men to do that, to write these comments, which are true. I've been saying I don't want to fight about everything. Republicans insisted on balancing the budget. on the backs of the middle class, seniors, students, single mothers, those who could least afford it. That's what they're doing over there today. And it's their intransigence, their refusal to compromise that leaves us facing the threat of a sequester, but it's difficult, but it's balanced. Going back to the August budget agreement now in order to protect wealthy special interests is no solution. Neither is refighting the battles of last year. Democrats agree we must reduce our deficit and make hard choices. But we believe in a balanced approach that shares the pain as well as the responsibility. Is the sequester the best way to achieve that balance? No. But Republicans refuse to consider more reasonable approaches. One, for example, that asks every American to pay his fair share while making difficult choices to reduce spending. And Democrats won't agree to a one-sided solution that lets the super wealthy off the hook while forcing the middle class and those in greatest need to bear all the hardship. Democrats believe we can protect Americans' access to health care, create jobs while investing in the future, and protect the poor and the elderly. But we can't do it alone. It'll take work and compromise. And so far, Republicans are unwilling to make a serious effort to achieve that result. Republicans have rejected our balanced approach. Their one-sided solution to across-the-board cuts would take away from the many to give to the few. Here's what this plan would do. Not all of it, but here's what their plan would do. Remember, they're taking it up over there in the House today. It would cut Medicaid benefits. It would increase the number of uninsured children, parents, seniors. That is, in addition to that, people with disabilities, by hundreds of thousands, just eliminate them. It would also put seniors in nursing homes at risk. That some of them would have to move out of the nursing home, I guess. It would punish Americans who receive tax credits to purchase health insurance when their financial circumstances change, causing 350,000 Americans just to have no coverage. This would add to the tens of millions that already exist that way. Weaken Wall Street reforms, protecting big banks and expensive consumers. Their legislation would once again target middle-class workers, food inspectors, air traffic controllers, border patrol agents, drug enforcement, FBI agents. They would have to be laid off. Cut funding for preventive health care programs that fight chronic illnesses, such as heart disease, cancer, strokes, diabetes, that cause 70% of the deaths in America. Preventive care would be reined in. Would slash block grant funding that allows states to help 23 million children, seniors, and disabled Americans live independently and out of poverty. No segment of the population is immune from this painful, absurd Republican plan, except maybe millionaires, billionaires, wealthy corporations. The Republican proposal cuts Meals on Wheels. It reduces food assistance for almost 2 million needy people. You know, one of the Republican candidates running for president said, President Obama is the food stamp president. Not a president. There are more poor people. Our economy's been in bad shape. People are struggling. The millionaires are doing fine. And in addition to what I've already mentioned, this thing they're taking up in the House today, it cuts off almost 300,000 children from free school lunches at a time when 1 in 5 children live in poverty. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops said the Republican plan fails a basic moral test. This budget sets very clear priorities. The problem is, the thing they're taking up in the House sets the wrong priorities. President Franklin Roosevelt said, human kindness has never weakened and stamina has softened the fiber of free people. I'll say that again. President Roosevelt said, human kindness has never weakened the stamina or softened the fiber of free people. A nation does not have to be cruel to be tough, is what Roosevelt said. So Republicans would do well to remember our nation is judged not only by the strength of its military, but also the strength of its values. So says General Eisenhower and President Roosevelt.
The leadership time is reserved.
Madam President.
Republican Leader.
With President Obama officially on the campaign trail now, it's hard not to be reminded of the kind of candidate he was the last time around and to marvel at the difference. At some point, the post-partisan healer who pledged to unite red and blue America became the divider-in-chief, a deeply divisive president who never seems to miss an opportunity to pit one group against another, who is now determined to win re-election not by appealing to America's best instincts, but all too often to their worst. Even the New York Times editorial page wrote this very morning that the country is more divided than it was 4 years ago under this president. Some have argued that the transformation we've witnessed proves that the president was a liberal ideologue all along, that the task of governing revealed his true instincts. And that may be true. But there's an even simpler explanation than that, and one that in some ways is even more disappointing. It's the idea that the president said what he needed to say to get elected then, and that he'll say whatever he needs to say to get reelected now. It encapsulates why the American people are so very skeptical of politicians. The president's policies may have disappointed. A health care bill that was supposed to lower costs is causing them to rise. A stimulus bill that was supposed to create jobs was better at generating punchlines. But one of the greatest disappointments of this presidency is the difference between the kind of leader this president said he was and the kind he turned out to be. How did that happen? Well, I think the president just put too much faith in government. Let's face it. There isn't a problem we face that this president didn't think the government could solve. And despite all the evidence to the contrary, he still can't seem to shake the idea that more government is the answer for what ails us. When the stimulus failed, it wasn't the government's fault. It was the Republicans. When the health care bill caused health care costs to rise, same thing. When trillions are spent and jobs don't come, it's ATM machines, it's the weather, it's bankers, it's the rich, it's Fox News, it's anything other than the government. This is why the sickening waste of taxpayer dollars we've seen so many times over the last 3 years, whether it's at a solar company like Solyndra or at a lavish party that federal bureaucrats threw for themselves in Vegas, it's viewed not as a symptom of a larger problem in Washington, but as a problem to be managed, something to acknowledge, and then move beyond. Because they just don't seem to see it. The president seems to view government the way some parents view their children. It can do no wrong. So if there's a problem to solve, a challenge to tackle, the solution is always the same. More government. More government. And the results are always the same. A disappointment to be blamed on somebody, anybody else. I think the president summed it up pretty well during a speech he gave in New York just yesterday. This is what he said. The only way we can accelerate job creation that takes place on a scale that is needed, he said, is bold action from Congress. Really? The only way to accelerate job creation is through Congress, not the private sector? Hasn't the experience of the last 3.5 years taught this president anything at all about the limitations of government action? 3.5 years and $5 trillion later, there are nearly 500,000 fewer jobs in the country than the day the president took office. That's not what most people would describe as a good return on investment. Yet that's all we get. The same government-driven solutions he's been pushing for 3.5 years. Nearly 13 million Americans who are actively looking for a job can't find one. Millions more have given up looking for a job altogether. as worker participation rate is the lowest it's been in 30 years. And more than half of all college graduates, the best prepared to enter the workforce, can't find a good job. Half of college graduates can't find a job. And this president is proposing the same old ideas that have failed before. Some government action failed? Then just do it again on a larger scale. That's the approach this president has taken. It's his approach still. It's the clearest sign he's literally out of ideas. But he's unwilling to try something different. He's unwilling to confront the fact that a government that might have worked well a half a century ago is outdated and in desperate need of reform. So he's resorting to the same old political gimmicks and games that he criticizes others for using. Earlier this year, the president mocked those who, every time gas prices go up, dust off their three-point plans to lower them, especially in an election year. That was the president. Yet yesterday, there he was in an election year up in New York proposing a five-point plan of his own to revive the economy, a to-do list, in effect, a to-do list for Congress. The cynicism here is literally breathtaking. Here's a president who in the morning worked hand in hand with Senate Democrats to ensure that legislation to freeze interest rates on student loans wouldn't pass. In the afternoon, giving a recycled speech in which he pleaded for an end to the very gridlock he was orchestrating. There's perhaps no better illustration of how far this president has come from the heady days of his last campaign. Look, Americans voted this president into office on a promise of bipartisan action. Orchestrating political show votes on student loans and giving Congress a Post-it note checklist of legislative items to pass before the election really isn't what the American people expected. They expected us to work together, and they still do. The president knows as well as I do that the solution to our economic problems lies not in the Post-it note congressional agenda dictated from a lectern in New York, but through a sound, limited government pro-growth plan, which includes comprehensive tax reform, a true all-of-the-above energy policy, and the elimination of burdensome regulations that are hurting business and hindering job creation. Now, Republicans have been calling for these policies for years, and the president at one time or another has claimed to support them. These are proposals where Republicans and Democrats can find common ground. In other words, a plan designed not to control free enterprise from Washington, but to liberate it. We just need the president to show some courage and some leadership. We'll get this economy going not by handing out more special favors and credits to favored industries and groups, but by simplifying the code, clearing out the loopholes, and lowering rates for everyone. In less than 8 months, Americans will be hit with the biggest tax increase in history unless we act. The president knows as well as I do how devastating this would be for the American people, literally for everyone. People who are already struggling will have to do with even less. Businesses that are already struggling just to keep afloat will see Washington getting an even bigger take than it already is. The looming tax hike will be absolutely devastating. And yet here we are, less than 8 months away from it, and the president is busy orchestrating failure here in the Senate and waving around some five-point plan cooked up by some high-paid political consultant out in Chicago. Now, I'm not in the business of giving the president campaign advice, but I am in the business of trying to get the best possible outcome for the American people. And here's an issue, tax reform, where I know the two parties have a shot at working together to help this economy and restore the American dream for all those who've started to doubt whether it will even be there in a few years. So I would respectfully ask the president to ignore his campaign consultants for once and do what's right for the nation as a whole. Republicans here in Congress are ready to work with you, Mr. President, on the kind of comprehensive reforms that you yourself have called for in the past. Working together might not help your campaign, but it sure would help the country. So my message to you is this: we're ready whenever you are. I yield the floor.
Madam President,
Senator from Kansas.
I ask unanimous consent to address the Senate as if we're in morning hour.
Without objection.
Madam President, once again, it's that time of year when many proud parents will watch their children walk across the graduation stage to receive their diplomas. 2 years ago, I watched my oldest daughter walk across a college graduation stage, and it was one of those moments for me in which I realized our country faces tremendous, enormous challenges, and if we fail to act, our children's future will be at significant risk. I believe all members of Congress, and in fact every American, has the responsibility to be a good steward of what has been passed on to us. So at that graduation event, I renewed my commitment to do my part to turn our country around. My fear is that we are not doing enough, that we as Americans, and especially we as members of this Congress, are not doing enough to offer our children a bright future. In the last 2 weeks, I've read headlines that catch my attention, would catch every American's attention. First, the amount of student loan debt has surpassed $1 trillion for the first time in American history. Americans now have more combined student loan debt than combined credit card debt. Second, the AP recently reported that 1 out of every 2 college graduates this year will be unemployed or underemployed. Unfortunately, it's not just college graduates that are having trouble finding a job and paying their bills. The Department of Labor reported just last week that more than 12 million Americans are still looking for work, and our economy only added 115,000 jobs in April, the lowest number of jobs added in 5 months. This makes 39 straight months of unemployment rate over 8%. Our first priority in Congress must be to strengthen our economy so more jobs can be created, more Americans can get back to work, and more graduates can pursue their dreams. Data tells us that for close to 3 decades, companies less than 5 years old have created almost all the new net jobs in America, averaging 3 million jobs each year. While startups provide the gasoline to fuel America's economic engine, new businesses are hiring fewer employees than in the past and make up a smaller share of all companies than in previous years. Data out last week from the Census Bureau shows that the startup rate fell to the lowest point on record for new firm births in 2010. While startups are so important, startup companies are so important to job creation, their numbers are now falling too. Given the disproportionate impact new businesses have in the economy, it makes sense to craft policies that help entrepreneurs start businesses and make it easier for these young businesses to grow. A former NASA engineer, now in the technology field, gave me a useful analogy. He described the process of designing a rocket or an airplane, which there are 2 forces at play that determine whether or not the rocket will launch or the plane will fly: thrust and drag. So much of what we seem to want to do around here tends to focus on the thrust, spending money and creating programs, when what we really ought to be doing is focusing on reducing the drag. Rather than spend money on government programs, Congress must and should enact policies that create an environment in which many entrepreneurs and their young companies have a better shot at success, and in the process of pursuing success, they put people to work. Reduce the drag so that the private sector can create jobs. To create this environment where these startup companies can be successful, I've introduced the Startup Act with Senator Warner. The Startup Act reforms federal regulatory process to ensure that the cost of compliance does not outweigh the benefits of regulations. The Startup Act alters the tax code to create incentives that will facilitate the financing and growth of new businesses. The Startup Act accelerates commercialization of university research so that more good ideas move out of the laboratory and into the marketplace where they can create jobs for Americans. And perhaps most importantly, the Startup Act helps America win the global battle for talent. On a recent trip to Silicon Valley, I met with startups, entrepreneurs, and some of the leading technology companies around the world. And they were just startup companies a few years ago. While I heard many encouraging stories of success, their number one concern was attracting and retaining highly skilled employees. One business I met said they had plans to hire dozens. I think the number was 68 foreign-born but U.S.-educated individuals, and to hire them here in the United States, but they were unable to get the visas necessary to have these workers work in the U.S. Rather than lose that talent, this company hired the employees but placed them at various international offices in countries with immigration policies that encourage the retention and the attraction of highly skilled foreign-born workers. Another company told me that with the talent increasing overseas, it will soon be easier for them to open offices and plants in other countries rather than to have the work done here in the United States. The last thing we want is for American businesses to have a better business climate in places outside the United States. And it's not just the loss of those dozens of jobs to some other country. Many of those people in those businesses will become entrepreneurs themselves and create their own businesses, hiring even more people down the road. And so we lose this talent, this skill, on two occasions. First, the direct jobs today, and ultimately the jobs that these entrepreneurs will create in the future. The future of our economic competitiveness depends upon America winning the global battle for talent. Foreign-born Americans have a strong record of creating businesses and employing Americans. Data shows us that 53% of immigrant founders of U.S.-based technology and engineering companies completed their highest degree at an American university. And rather than send these talented, highly educated individuals who have been educated here in the United States back home once they graduate, we should do much more to allow them to remain here in the United States, where their skills, their talent, and their intellect, as well as their new ideas, can fuel U.S. economic growth. We're not talking about illegal immigration. We're talking about legal immigration. It makes no sense to educate these talented foreign-born students in America and then send them to their home countries to compete against Americans for jobs. The Startup Act will help America win this global battle for talent. The Startup Act creates entrepreneur visas for foreign entrepreneurs who register a business and employ Americans in the United States. The Startup Act also creates a new STEM visa for foreign students who graduate from an accredited U.S. university with a master's or Ph.D. in science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. Our own Department of Commerce projects that STEM jobs will grow by 17% in the years ahead. We have to retain more highly skilled and highly talented, highly educated individuals, the ones we educate in America, for us to remain competitive in a global economy. We need to make sure our own U.S.-born and educated citizens have those job opportunities as well. We do not want to risk the loss of the next Mark Zuckerberg to Brazil or to India. Doing so will fuel American economic growth and result in the creation of jobs here in America by retaining these folks. Despite the overwhelming evidence Congress should address this issue, conventional wisdom in Washington, D.C. says that not much will get done in an election year. My guess is that 80% of my colleagues here in Congress would agree with the proposals contained in this legislation. Particularly 80%, I think, would agree with the aspect of the legislation dealing with STEM visas. But we are told that because we can't do everything, we can't do anything. And that excuse is no longer a good one and should not be accepted. And we cannot continue to operate under the sentence that always says, well, we can't do anything in an election year. Our country desperately needs us to act now, not later. And in fact, in the short time I've been a member of the Senate, about 14, 15 months, 6 other countries have changed their laws to encourage these types of individuals to work in their countries, to create jobs, to support entrepreneurship, innovation, and job creation in those countries. In just the little over a year that I've been a member of the Senate, 6 other countries have advanced further than we have, while we have waited because we can't do anything because it's an election year. America cannot turn a blind eye to those developments or to use the upcoming elections as an excuse to do nothing yet again on an issue that is so critical to our future. Congress should work to make it easier for companies to grow, because in a free market, when people have a good idea and work hard, they not only enhance their own lives with success, but the lives of so many others through the products and jobs they create. If we don't take the steps now to win the global battle for talent, our country's future economic growth will be limited. That means college grads and young people will have fewer opportunities, and higher rates of unemployment may become the norm instead of the exception. Allowing talented foreign-born U.S. students and entrepreneurs to remain in the United States will create jobs for more Americans. So I'll continue to work with my colleagues in the Senate to implement policies like those contained in the Startup Act so that more entrepreneurs can turn their ideas into reality, that they will have the chance for success. We owe the next generation of Americans the opportunity to pursue their dreams, that those who this month walk across graduation stages in high schools and colleges and universities and technical colleges and community colleges across our country will have the opportunity to pursue their dreams, what we all know as the American dream. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam President. First, I ask unanimous consent that Sid Gedge, a detailee at the Commerce Committee, be allowed floor privileges during the remainder of the day.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Now I ask unanimous consent to speak as in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I come to the floor again to urge all of us to join together on a bipartisan basis and to reauthorize the National Flood Insurance Program, to do it now, to do it quickly, because time is running out. Madam President, on May 31st, the entire National Flood Insurance Program will expire. When the clock strikes midnight that day, it will be gone unless we act. And act we must. This is an important program for the country. In my neck of the woods in South Louisiana in particular, almost every real estate closing is dependent on this program because those properties need flood insurance for there to be a closing. That's very typical in many other parts of the country. And so here we are trying to get out of a real estate-led recession, trying to bolster the economy, and we're on the verge of letting the entire National Flood Insurance Program expire yet again. Madam President, what's so frustrating about this is there are not big disagreements about how to get this done. This is not an overly partisan issue. We are not bitterly divided. This is merely an issue of getting floor time in the United States Senate. The House has acted last year in a bipartisan way. The Senate committee on which I serve has acted. I've worked very closely with my subcommittee chair, John Tester. We've acted in a bipartisan way. We've put together a good 5-year reauthorization bill, but we need to move this on and off the Senate floor to get this done before the end of the month. And so, Madam President, again, I urge the distinguished majority leader, Senator Reid, to give this important matter floor time. We all come here and talk about needing to improve the economy. We all come to the floor and talk about jobs. Well, this is absolutely necessary in all of those categories, with all of those issues in mind, to extend the National Flood Insurance Program. And let's not just put a Band-Aid on it again and let it limp along with a very short-term extension. Let's do the full 5-year reauthorization, which we can do, which is well in sight. Madam President, groups around the country, particularly those working in the real estate industry in this part of the economy, strongly support this effort. And therefore, Madam President, I want to put into the record several items, a letter to Senator Reid and Senator McConnell, signed by dozens of associations all along the political spectrum urging this action. Also, I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Also, another letter along the same vein addressed to Senator Tester, the subcommittee chair, and myself, the ranking member on the subcommittee, again strongly supporting this effort. Let's do it now. This is the Smarter, Safer Coalition, and this letter is dated May 9th. I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
And also an op-ed in roll call written by 2 representatives of this broad coalition, again explaining the absolute importance, the critical nature of doing this full, longer-term reauthorization. I ask unanimous consent that that be placed on the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I keep coming to the floor urging this because it is so important and because it is so achievable. Again, there are not big issues dividing us. This is not a partisan issue. We just need Senate floor time to get it done. And, Madam President, in that vein, I will be doing two things today and in the near future. First, I will be passing around to all members of the Senate a new letter addressed to Senator Reid to urge that this matter be put on the floor absolutely as soon as possible. We urge this on a bipartisan basis in a letter dated February 14th. 41 senators, both parties, signed that. This new letter restates that case, and of course now it's more urgent than ever as the clock ticks to May 31st, just 3 weeks and 1 day away. And, Madam President, I will also be proposing an amendment to the next matter that comes on the Senate floor to incorporate the Senate bill with perfecting amendments that have been worked out toward the floor, to incorporate that amendment on that next bill on the Senate floor. My understanding is that will either be the FDA user fee reauthorization or a small business tax bill. Neither of those bills are bitterly partisan or highly divisive. And so I will be proposing as an amendment to either of those bills, whichever comes to the floor next, the full reauthorization of the National Flood Insurance Program along the lines the Senate committee has proposed. So again, I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support that effort, and I urge Senator Reid to use that as a mechanism to get this done now, this month, before the expiration of the program. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Madam President,
Senator from South Dakota.
I ask unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Madam President, in 2005, the European Union began their emissions trading scheme, which attempts to cap emissions of carbon dioxide from stationary sources within the EU. Starting earlier this year in 2012, civil aviation operators departing from or landing in Europe began to be included in this emission scheme. Now, under this program, any airline, including non-European airlines, flying into and out of Europe will be required to pay for EU emissions allowances. This change comes at a time when EU allowance prices continue to decline to a little over €6, and the European Commission is beginning to consider proposals to drive up the prices. Allowances will be collected for the entirety of the flight, including portions in U.S. and international airspace. For example, this means a flight leaving from Los Angeles, California, and flying to London would be taxed on the entirety of their flight, not just the fractional part of the flight that is over EU airspace. Or to put it another way, you would be taxed as if 100% of your flight was in EU airspace, even though approximately only 7% actually was. That's a flight originating in California here in the United States and flying to London. Very simply, the unilateral imposition of such a scheme on the United States and other countries is arbitrary, unfair, and a violation of international law. Plus, it is being done without any guarantees for environmental improvements and at a huge cost to the aviation industry and constituents that we serve here in this country. According to the International Air Transport Association, the economic cost of this program for airlines is expected to be $1.3 billion in 2012. Let me repeat that. $1.3 billion in 2012 and reach as high as $3.5 billion by the year 2020. Those are revenues coming out of the airlines in this country that would be used to pay for this fee, this tax, if you will, imposed by the EU on United States airspace. By requiring commercial aviation to comply, the EU ETS also limits airlines' capital that could be available for other meaningful purposes, including their ability to invest in more fuel-efficient engines, alternative sources of fuel, in research and development. Now, let me be clear that no one in Congress is against the EU implementing ETS within their boundaries. However, I believe that any system that includes international and other non-EU airspace must be addressed through the International Civil Aviation Organization, the ICAO policies, of which the United States and 190 countries are members. In fact, under current ICAO standards, the aviation industry is targeted to achieve a 1.5% average annual improvement in carbon and fuel efficiency through 2020 and carbon neutral growth from 2020 forward. That is why the United States airline industry, those advocates in the industry also agree that a single global approach to greenhouse gas emissions negotiated and set at the ICAO is preferred to the unilateral EU ETS system. Even the Obama administration testified before the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure in July of 2011 that an EU ETS is inconsistent with international aviation law. The State Department and the U.S. Department of Transportation are also pressing this issue with their counterparts in Europe and are considering all legal and policy options to prevent further application of EU ETS to U.S. air carriers. In addition, other nations have voiced opposition. Those nations include Argentina, Brazil, China, India, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Mexico, the Russian Federation, and South Africa. In fact, China's ambassador to the EU recently suggested that they will begin canceling Airbus orders if the EU ETS remains in place. Also, countries like Italy, the Netherlands, France, Belgium, and Spain, all EU member states, are calling for the postponement of EU ETS out of concerns raised by the international community. Even European manufacturers and airlines, such as Airbus, Air France, and British Airways, have urged their respective governments to stop the escalating trade conflict between the EU and the rest of the world. The EU has no right to play policeman and undermine the ongoing work at the ICAO. As a result of this action by the EU on December 7, 2011, I introduced the European Union Missions Trading Scheme Prohibition Act, Senate Bill 1956, which now has 7 co-sponsors, both Democrats and Republicans. The bill gives the Secretary of Transportation the authority to take the necessary steps to ensure that America's aviation operators are not penalized by any system unilaterally imposed by the EU. The bill also requires the Secretary of Transportation, the Administrator of the FAA, and other senior U.S. officials to use their authority to conduct international negotiations and take other actions necessary to ensure that U.S. operators are held harmless from the actions of the European Union. The House of Representatives passed a similar bill by voice vote on October the 24th last year in 2011. The U.S. commercial aviation community, including airlines and manufacturers, are all supportive of my bipartisan bill. And next month, I'm looking forward to the Commerce Committee hearing, which is scheduled to take a closer look at this important issue and at my legislation. Madam President, doing nothing is not an option. The unilateral imposition of the EU emissions trading scheme is a violation of international law and is hurting U.S. airlines, manufacturers, and consumers. Now, keep in mind, with near-record oil prices, the EU ETS will add to the already high amount that airline and passengers pay for fuel. We need to act now. We need to send a clear and unequivocal message and pass my bipartisan bill that addresses this scheme and protects the U.S. aviation industry and American sovereignty. I hope, Madam President, that we will act on this legislation and make sure that this issue once and for all is put to rest and that the European Union is not able to assess a tax or a fee on American airlines operating in American airspace. Madam President, I yield the floor. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Kakan.
you.